Hi all, and welcome to China EVs and More, where my co-host Lei Xing and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. We will open the room up at around the 40-minute mark to anyone who's keen to ask us any questions. One rule, we appreciate vigorous debate, but let's all be considerate and respectful to each other. What Lei and I discussed today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. Even if it sounds like investment advice, it isn't. We encourage those who enjoy this room to please connect with us on LinkedIn, follow us on Twitter, get the word out to your friends, and of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li, and I am the Managing Director at Sino Auto Insights, a Beijing-based consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. Lei, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, sir, and definitely sign up for Tu's newsletter. It's one of the best. My name is Lei, and I am the former chief editor of China Auto Review, which published also newsletters and the only tabloid magazine in English focused exclusively on the Chinese auto market. I've spent pretty much the last 20 years or so on the ground in China covering the industry. I am now in the U.S. as an independent analyst consultant, still trying to keep tabs on the rapidly evolving market. And also, I am the co-host of this podcast. So this is episode number 34. Well, it's the last day of September and also our last episode of the month. And what do you know? We're doing this show on a special day too. It's International Podcast Day. So at least on my side of the world. So yeah, it certainly felt like a long September, didn't it? And especially a long last day of September, because I just feel like a gazillion things just happened in the industry across China, Europe, and the US over the past 24 hours. Okay.
Because now it's global.
Right.
Because now it's global.
Not to mention the major headlines over the past few days. And over there on your side, it's already October and the start of the 7-day National Day holiday break. And I just heard it's also your wedding anniversary. So congratulations, man.
Thank you.
So
my wife has been patient enough for the last 11 years, so God bless her. But I also heard a few days ago was your anniversary, so happy anniversary to you.
So thanks, man. So I thank you very much for pulling overtime for this episode. Rest well and enjoy the holidays, because I know you're going to be busy a couple of weeks coming up right after. Right. So this week, this is the part where I summarize the headlines, but today I think it's going to take me longer than usual. So bear with me. And here I go. This week, we're talking about September EV sales outlook. And several Chinese smart EV startups, including Neta, Leap Motor, and if you want to include Voya, have already announced their numbers today and tomorrow. Well, today, your time. So XPeng just announced 10,000 deliveries a month for the first time ever. A major milestone. Okay.
First to do it, right?
And more might come out as we're doing this show right now. So I'm going to be refreshing my phone pretty constantly. NIO just had his...
I'm going to say, really quick, I'm going to say this. They're the first member of the 10K Club.
10K Club.
That's what
we
I'll
call
say.
it the 10K Club.
The 10K Club.
Yep. NIO just had his big day, officially launching the ES8 in Norway and opening its first NIO house outside of China in Oslo. Red Flag or Hongqi exported roughly 200 EHS9 electric SUVs to Norway a day earlier. Geely just had an unbelievable week as China's new ever-expanding global automotive empire makes a series of bold moves. Smartphones, satellites, battery swapping stations, flying cars, Polestar IPO, electric heavy-duty trucks. Speaking of battery swapping, third-party swapping operator Alton just announced a new renminbi 1.5 billion financing round to expand its battery swapping network. And over here, Ford's baller EV investment of $11.4 billion in Tennessee and Kentucky, the biggest investment in its history, followed by GM's announcement to source renewable energy at all its plants in the U.S. by 2025, 5 years earlier than planned. Wait, there's more. Rolls-Royce reveals first electric super luxury car Spectre and plans to be all electric by 2030. Waymo and Cruise got their permit from California DMV to operate paid robotaxi services for the general public. Lordstown Motors announcing sale of its Ohio plant to Foxconn, where the pair project with Fisker might bear fruit.
That's a real estate transaction, by the way.
And Lucid starts production of the 520-mile range Air in Arizona. Electric Last Mile Solutions begins production of the electric van at a plant where Hummers were made for years.
Mishawaka, right?
Mm-hmm. And I'm done, and I'm out of breath. So, in summary of the summaries, it's the week of big bets revealed. So we're not going to get into every one of these, but in our preview, the topics were listed. Obviously, September sales is one of the topics that we were going to talk about today. And it so happened that a couple of EV startups announced numbers, ahead of time. And all eyes are on China as far as Tesla. We're not going to get those numbers perhaps until we do our show next week at this time. So around the 8th is when the numbers usually come out. But with the holidays, it probably will be delayed a bit, maybe to the 9th or the 10th. But have you seen the September numbers? Xpeng, we talked about it. It's huge. I didn't expect it, but in retrospect, if you remember, out of the top 3, Xpeng was the only one that did not issue any sort of statement saying we're going to adjust our September delivery or Q3 outlook down. Whereas Li Auto and NIO, they issued statements, explicitly saying they were affected by the chip shortage. And now that Xpeng came out with this 10K club, I think I'm going to erase chip shortage from my vocabulary because...
Smokescreen. It's smokescreen.
As we talked about it many times on this show, the chip shortage is not created equal. And especially considering that the CEO, He Xiaopeng, he posted a WeChat moment saying that because of Bosch and the Malaysian sub-supplier, that the chip supplier, that they were kind of in a bad situation. But it turns out, it wasn't bad at all. And then Neta, I think Neta is one of the real surprises. I think their deliveries numbers this year, every month has been going up. So
coming from nowhere.
Coming from nowhere. And Li Motor, in their announcement, they frankly said, okay, sorry, we had the chip shortage problem, so September deliveries were down month on month. But again,
and they had built up a lot of sales momentum up until that point. So it's a little bit disappointing to hear that from them. So
yeah, but then again, they announced the I forgot to mention this in my my this week headlines. They announced the C11 compact electric SUV priced in the heart of the, I think, upcoming competitive segment of the market. The 150 to 200,000, so $25,000.
And for those, wondering, the FX is around 6.5. So if a dollar buys you about 6.5 RMB. So
right, and Tesla. I know we have some people on the show, especially Taylor. They've been looking at this Tesla. So in July and August, if we recap, it was all about exports. right? And it was basically roughly 3-to-1 ratio. So 40,000 units, a quarter of that was domestic, 3/4 were exported. And I'm seeing some numbers for September upwards of 50,000. That includes exports. But it looks like that ratio is going to be flipped. So I am expecting at least 30,000 units domestic sales and 10,000 units exported. And I think I'm underestimating. It looks from my sources and seeing some of the
early numbers
and some of the comments and what's going on in China from my sources is it's going to be a huge month, no matter how you look at it. How huge, I don't know, but anything under 30,000 domestic sales, I would be surprised and I would say it's a failure.
I agree. Let me interject a little bit here. There's a couple of different things we should look at, right? First of all, the plant is supposed to be able to build 500,000 units per year, Shanghai Giga I'm talking about. So if we break that down, that's like 40,000 units a month. And if we're running at 80-90% capacity or over 90% capacity, which plants on continuously have a difficult time doing at times. And so it's great because over the last several quarters, I believe, they've ramped and they've gotten to that 40,000 unit capacity. Okay, so that's a good thing. You know, people are working, cars are being built. And then the second thing we should look at is where they're being shipped. And this is where I think some of the controversy is because, you know, Tesla has been telling us that the first 2 months we dedicate to export because Giga Berlin is not up and running. And so we still need to support our customers in Europe, which is fine. So for the first 2 periods of this quarter, like you said, it's been 80% production headed to Europe, 20% in China, being sold into China. So then they said the third quarter is when we dedicate most of our capacity to domestic sales. And so if we don't see over 30,000 units, I think we can imply that maybe there's a bit of weakness in the demand for Teslas in China. But I am expecting big numbers for the domestic side. What I am actually looking at and interested to see is what the ratio of Ys to 3 are, because there is no product that's going to be introduced next year for Tesla globally. And so the 3 and the Y need to maintain healthy sales for a good 14, 15 months at least, you know, unless there's a surprise product, which I don't believe there is, in order for Tesla to maintain their status quo. Now, what we should be seeing is growth because in August, there were 235,000 NEVs sold in China. That made it 1.6 million units. So we're well on our way to 3 million units this year in 2021. And if Tesla is not taking a good chunk of that, then they're losing share somewhere or not gaining share, right? When they supposedly have one of the best EVs out there. That just tells me that there's a lot more competition in China than the rest of the world, and they'll adjust. What I'm looking forward to is seeing how they'll adjust. So that's kind of, I wanted to unpack it in a little more detail than just talking about numbers. So
yeah, I agree. This is a great point. You look at these numbers in an absolute sense and also a relative sense. So in an absolute sense, Tesla is going to get their numbers no matter what. And Model Y, I expect to be significantly more than Model 3. And that's the absolute way of looking at it. The relatively way of looking at it is the share of the total market, right? So in August, it was well over 300,000, by the way, if we include everything, the electric commercial vehicles. And in September, the total market, based on my projection, is going to be at least 300,000 units again. You see these fluctuations. Some companies are breaking records. Some companies are having a month-to-month reduction. But the fact of the matter is Tesla might be growing, but other competitors are growing alongside. And if we look at the top 3, foreseeable future, the top 3 are likely going to be the BYDs, BYD, Wuling, and Tesla. Okay, and then if you pool the big five, what I call the big five Chinese smart EV startups, that's a huge chunk. But the top three players are likely going to be BYD, Tesla, and Wuling for the foreseeable future. But if you look at BYD, right, August was over 60,000 units, and they might be going full NEV pretty soon, because that was like what 90% of their sales in August were NEVs. And one thing and
with BYD, they're not the cheap BYDs of 10 years ago or 8 years ago.
No,
so
right, and one interesting happened just a couple of days ago is Tesla on their Weibo, I think it was their legal department Weibo, said the reports of just 2,000 registrations in August were wrong. And I guess the Qatar, the insurance, which announces the insurance numbers, they updated the domestic registration for August to be 13,000. So another way I think for the audience to bear in mind is there's a lot of sales numbers out of China, and we take all of those with a grain of salt, because oftentimes they don't paint the exact picture. There's the delivery numbers, right? There's the CPCA sales numbers. There's the insurance numbers. So, the volumes are going to be there, but we look at it as, these competitors moving along a certain trajectory and see where one is compared to the others. And I'm definitely convinced that Tesla is facing the pressure, okay? No matter how well it's doing itself, but there's other ones. And you look at Voya, right? At least their volumes are growing as well, even though it's very small, less than 1,000 units. And we have, Xpeng.
They need to look at that. If I was on the Voya team, I'd have to look at that as a big win, right? Because we are growing in an increasingly competitive market, right? So
right, and then
that's a good thing.
And then some of the foreign brands, right? Volkswagen was June, July, August was 3,000, 5,000, 7,000. Are they going to get to 9,000 in September?
Are they going to join the 10,000 club? Are they going to join
the maybe there's a chance. Who knows? The only thing I'm sure of, every month since June, July, August, and every month thereafter, we're going to see a lot of different fluctuations in numbers. I think that's normal. Tesla has its specific seasonality thing, right? Early in the quarter, late, hellish quarter push.
In the traditional automotive sector, sales numbers are always reconciled, So even in 2021, first couple of weeks of January, they'll be reconciled for the entire year. Now, normally those numbers don't fluctuate by a ton. But, it's better just to look at it from a guidance standpoint, unless it's clear that there was a huge bump or a huge drop in sales, then I don't know if scrutinizing 10 units, 100 units, 1,000 units really makes a ton of sense. So.
Yeah, and at least from a lot of the photos that I've seen, Tesla delivery centers, DMVs, it looks like it's packed. And
I'm not seeing any less of them on the road. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, even right. So and for others as well, and for Xpeng specifically, they just had that accident right on the P7 where the NGP supposedly there were some issues, but I think they came out with a statement saying that it was working properly. So I think it was still a driver issue, and I think so as well. I think they're going to get over it. And on the Tesla side, I don't think we have to get into the details, but
this is head scratcher.
Yeah, the customer sued, and won, but then Tesla is countersuing the dancing lady as well as the Han Chao who won for 5 million RMB, and this is very perplexing. But it's this is going to go on for a while.
5 million RMB is a lot of money for anybody, but in China, 5 million RMB is a huge amount of money for a normal person in China. A huge number.
Yeah, and it's still going to be this good and bad simultaneously happening. And if we look over the past 6 months since we talked about the incident in April in the Shanghai Auto Show. Tesla is pretty much unscathed, right? I mean, there's been accidents here and there. There's been accidents here in the U.S. with autopilot, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's
he knows to treat the China market and Chinese social media differently. Whether his local team decides to push against some of the negative press that they get here, I don't know if it's just different, and I think they've realized that they need to better align with the local authorities here, and I think they're trying to do that.
And now if we throw in the news today that Cruise and Waymo got the go-ahead with the paid robotaxi
driverless
services, right? Then you have another issue on the plate for Tesla. So much for their FSD, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for
I do. Go ahead.
One more number to throw out is the January to September production, at least in Giga Shanghai, was over 300,000 units. So at that rate, they're going to get to their, if they do 50,000 a month, then production rate, then they're going to get almost to their full capacity. I think it's at 450,000. The latest I checked, yeah.
And I want to stress that if that number is correct, people throw around that 70% number, that 70% of parts are shared between the Model 3 and the Model Y. That is a lot of cost savings potentially for Tesla. So that allows them to do what they've done quite often here in the China market, and that's reduce price and still protect some margin. So if they're making 45,000 units a month, that's awesome because they're making cost savings on all those parts that are shared. So I think now again, China is becoming a crossover, or has become. Should we say has become, or is becoming a crossover and SUV country, just like the United States. So we should see more Model Ys than Model 3s sold. But if we're seeing a 3 over 2.5 to 1 ratio, then I would think that's a bit concerning for Tesla.
Yeah. So and so for this year, the remaining 3 months, I'm not too excited or too worried about it. What I am looking at is once Giga Berlin goes online, how much of a role does Giga Shanghai play as far as export is concerned? And if it's diminished, will that 450,000, capacity, does China have the demand, or will Tesla continue to use that capacity for export to other countries? So that will be interesting to see, and that's in 2022, pretty much.
I could see a scenario where they start to push further into Singapore, they push further into Australia, although those are two right-hand drive countries, and so it's a little bit different.
They did export some to Japan, I believe, from Giga Shanghai.
Right. Yep.
Right? So it shouldn't be a problem.
Which is a right-hand drive.
Right.
Which is a right-hand drive country. So I think if domestic demand does soften, they still have an outlet for any excess capacity. I don't see it being a ton of excess capacity, but any excess capacity they could turn into right-hand drive, ship to Japan, ship to Singapore, ship to Australia, and perhaps India, although I think there's a decent tariff between Chinese products shipped to India. So the rest of Southeast Asia, I think, is a very, very small percentage of sales for Tesla, but I could see them opening up more SEA sales channels to take up some of that slack if there's any weakness in demand. So
yeah, and just to sort of we can go on to the next topic, but just sort of recap my thoughts is the 30,000 bottom line for domestic sales and the 50,000 total. Maybe the number will be somewhere in between. We'll see when they come out later next month from my side.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you look at the total capacity, 450,000, 500,000 units, it's pretty significant. If you divide that, it's 1/6 of the 3 million units, right?
Yeah.
Just to, it's still pretty significant anyway you look at it, and
it will still be quite an accomplishment. Whatever number they end up with at the end of 2021, it should be almost at least double, right? I think they were at 137,000 units sold in China for 2020, so. I mean, these are monster numbers for Tesla. So any way you want to look at it, whether it's meeting expectations or not, that's in the eye of the beholder. One thing I have to, and our boy Alfred's in the spaces, so I gotta give Wuling a shout out, man. They're chugging away at 40,000 units a month, basically like clockwork, man. They're the little engine that could, and it is an amazing, cool story, right? It's just a really cool
and
story.
they're still coming out with new products. They're not stopping, right? They're not just gonna sit, on that one model.
Because they know competitors are coming out. They know that any slack they give, then the Cherry Nano is going to eat up some of that demand.
Yeah.
And so they got to keep on innovating. And that's the whole point of the China market, where I think, people that don't follow it very closely, I mean, this Wuling comes out with a new variation every quarter, basically. And it's cool to see, it's not something that is likely going to be exported too much, but I could see it being a city car for a few cities in outside of China. But it's just a cool story.
Yeah, and the only remaining players that we haven't talked about is Li Auto and NIO, and whether they're going to join a 10K club, which I don't think so, in September. But then again, what happened to XPeng was, right, it was sort of sandbagging a bit. Could it happen? Maybe not. I think they will be down as they predicted. But sooner or later, I think the top three will join the 10K club. I have no doubt.
Yeah. I think before the end of this year.
Yeah. So and the other wild card for the top three is who's going to get to 100,000 K annual.
Yeah.
And if you compare that with Tesla, then they still have ways to go. So in that sense, Tesla is still leading by far.
I am making odds right now because I showed you pictures with you. There is that retail store in Shimao where I live right next door to. It's basically a small little kiosk that has 3 XPeng cars, and as of this week, they have a P5 in the showroom. So once they start delivering that, let's say the production's already started. Let's say they get to ramp by middle of November. I think they'll get close to 15,000 units by the end of this year if they're able to get the P5 ramped with no issues on supplies for commodities or anything like that. I think the P5 is going to do very well.
Right. So they're
even the high end $35,000 one with the 2 LiDAR, right?
They're at over 56,000 for the first 3 quarters. So if we do 15,000 a month, then they might be real close, adding that maybe later in the year. This is a very China-specific seasonality, is that November and December, just wait. They're going to be phenomenal numbers. You just wait.
It's just craziness. November, December is just a weird.
Yeah, the industry as a whole, I'm predicting over 1 million units for Q4. So that's 333,000
that's
a
bananas.
month, which is not that high consider what's been, happening.
And the perplexing thing is that the legacies are primarily on the sidelines, which is mind-boggling because it's the Chinese domestic makers and Tesla that are selling these volumes. Craziness, absolute craziness, and it's definitely not what Volkswagen had envisioned when 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they were like, we're going to sell the ID series, all 3 of them, aggressively into the China market starting in 2021, right?
Yeah, and they have a total of 5 models, more than any of the smart EV startups, right? So
yeah, so back to the drawing board for VW for sure.
Yeah.
But so it should be said that Polestar has announced that they will be going public, targeting a $20 billion valuation. I think last year they said they sold, or as of this year, maybe they sold 10,000 cars. So those cars aren't being sold in China, and they're not really being sold in the United States either. So they're probably being sold in Sweden, parts of Europe, because they're struggling here and they're struggling in the United States.
Yeah.
The third vehicle that they're launching is going to be built in South Carolina, right? So that should help them with the U.S. But
yeah, Polestar is part of Geely. Maybe we talk about it a little bit later.
yeah, let's move it over.
NIO, we can move on to NIO. A big day in Norway. I actually got up and watched the live stream a little bit, and so at the very beginning there was this conversation between William Lee and one of the consulate people from the Norway consulate in Shanghai. And it was revealed that the Norwegian export plan started in 2018. So roughly the same time as they just began delivery. So this is 3 years in the making. And I thought the significance of it was not so much, NIO was definitely not the first Chinese brand, not just the smart EV brand, but the overall Chinese brand. They're not the first Chinese brand to export to Europe, but they are the first one to kind of export their entire online, offline swapping software, hardware, business model entirely to Norway. Okay, and it looks like this model will be copied elsewhere. Next year, I'm expecting Germany, because they did hint that the ET7 will be launched in Germany with the latest ADAS features. So I thought that was the significant part of it, and just the way, I guess, finding these local senior executives and localizing the Norwegian characteristics for this business model, localizing the European characteristics for this model, because the European customers are not exactly the same as the Chinese customers in their habits, right? But
just the age difference is startling, right?
Yeah, and so they obviously they're going to tweak a bit of their entire business model, but if we look at what they announced, this is actually quite asset heavy, right?
Yeah.
Putting
lots of capital needed.
Swapping stations. I think 20 next year over Norway, and offering the 75 kilowatt hour battery we talked about last episode, and the 100 kilowatt hour. The 100 kilowatt hour is actually going to be available first, and then the 75 kilowatt hour, and then the BAS model. So this is like spearheading kind of the European initiative, and to see they don't have the swapping stations up yet, how it's gonna work out over there. We still need some time to see, but at least this is opening a new chapter, right?
Yeah.
So I applaud them, but back home, right, they still have a bit of issues. So again, same. Everybody's having their good and the bad. Nobody's smooth sailing.
Selling cars in multiple markets is complicated. It's very complicated.
Yeah,
it's inexpensive too.
I posted one of the comments in their app. I said, I'm looking forward to you opening up in New York City's Fifth Avenue soon.
So you should tell them how many Norwegians downloaded the app. I forget the number. It was some crazy number.
I hear Marcel from Twitter, who I follow, he does a good job on NIO commentaries, was over 100,000. But I heard on the live stream that there's some thousands of people downloaded the app. I could be wrong, but this is also the habits of spending time on the phone, spending time on that community, spending time on lifestyle. I've bought my share of things on NIO's app, okay, for my kid. Backpacks, T-shirts. Because when you check in every day, you get a point. And if you do that continuously, your point go up pretty fast. And you can buy things with points. Things like this. That kind of, sticking, what do you call it? The customer stickiness, right? The customer stickiness, how they
that's what every app's one of every app's goal is to make sure you stay on the platform, because that creates more opportunities for you to spend money, to promote it to other people, and to really improve it, right? So, I think it's worth mentioning for those that aren't that familiar with NIO. In China, they have a lifestyle app that connects them to NIO houses, which are effectively Starbucks kind of just meeting places for NIO buyers and NIO customers. And there's, I want to say, over 400,000 people that have downloaded this app and have created this community, including Lei. And and to Lei's point earlier, they're trying to export it to Norway.
Right. They have a specific Norwegian NIO app specifically for the market. So, yeah.
And so it would be interesting to see if they worked with a Norwegian design agency to see what the differences are in the app,
right. And also,
if there are any.
Also, the Nomi intelligent assistant speaking, English and Norwegian, right? They showed a clip in a live stream. Another, I'm reading Kai-Fu Lee's book on AI 2041. So on the live stream, they used the Chinese company iFlightech. AI simultaneous interpretation.
Translation?
Yeah, translation technology where both Chinese and English would appear as the speakers say their, whether it's Chinese or English. And I took
grade it?
Yeah, I took a specific look at it, and it was pretty good. Both the English and the Chinese, meaning, recognizing the English, spoken English, and putting that into the text and having the Chinese translation, and vice versa.
Back and forth, yeah.
So I mean, this is a bit mind-boggling because AI is, the simultaneous interpreters is, I think, one of the jobs that are being disrupted if this continues to.
I got to tell you this, Lei, and your daughter is bilingual too, but my wife emphasizes speaking Chinese, and my argument against that, and not against it, but not to place so much emphasis on learning Chinese, is that there's going to be so many tools. But I get what she wants, but I'm just playing devil's advocate because she gets on them a little bit about reading and writing. I try to help them out a little bit.
Yeah, so I think this was the first time I've been to some conferences in the past few years, live conferences in China where they use the AI simultaneous interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
I remember it was not as good, but it's amazing how this technology grows and this natural language recognition is a big feature on many of these brands cars. Okay,
it has to be a key feature first of all,
especially for export.
But here's an aside for you that I thought was kind of cool. I don't know if it actually makes money, but there was a simultaneous translation going on for an AmCham event I went to, and the people were actually in a different city. They were just listening and translating via Zoom or something like that. So I thought that was pretty cool, pretty funny. But let me rant for 30 seconds here, because NIO is spending a ton of money, a ton of capital to really try to do and enter Norway the right way, which is great. They're a premium brand and they need to do that. And the announcement that they're entering Germany with the ET7 should freak out these domestic automakers there. But if you listen to them in past statements, all they really care about is Tesla. And this plays right into NIO's hands, number one, because do not sleep on NIO. Do not sleep on NIO, German Big Three, because they will come and wow the EU customers, and you're going to be wondering what just happened. If you're only focused on Tesla, I think you're chasing, and I've said this before, you're chasing a ghost. There was an article in Reuters that said that multiple Chinese EV companies are coming to the EU. You and I agree that is not going to stop. There's going to be more and more and more. And so if you're solely focused on Tesla, you're missing the whole point and they're missing the boat, right? And so I just think that they need to really focus on moving forward with their innovation, their software, their change to retail strategy, their customer engagement, their marketing, digital marketing. Yet they want to just call out Tesla every single time they have a presentation. So stepping off my soapbox, done with my rant. What do you think?
Yeah, with the Norwegian market, it's a unique market in that it's pretty liberal, it's pretty open. The consumers there are pretty open to all different kinds of EV brands, right? So Ford Mach-E is doing pretty well, I heard. Tesla is doing well. Audi e-tron was, I think, the top-selling model there in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And now you have Xpeng, you have NIO, you have Red Flag, Hongqi. I heard the orders are about 500 so far. They've been ordered, and they just shipped about roughly 200 units. And others, MG, iWays. You're gonna visit iWays, I guess, later in October, right? So, in Shanghai,
I hope to. Yeah.
They're actually the only brand with multiple European entries, right? And nobody talks about them. BYD, right? They're 1,500 units by the end of this year of their Tang EV. So
And I think what's worth mentioning is I believe the D1, the BYD one, the DD partner vehicle, that started shipping into Egypt. And I was talking to a friend or someone I know at iWays. She told me that their U5 is the most popular in Israel. And so they're coming. They're coming, Europe. You better be ready for it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying every product is going to be great, but there's going to be a lot of brands coming.
And if we talk about Germany, then it's an entirely different story, right? So Germany is dominated by the German brands, especially Volkswagen, right? Their ID sales are at the top of the rankings.
Mm-hmm. And Renault Zoe.
Right, and you had alluded to what's going on with kind of the geopolitical situation here in the U.S. and also EU with Germany voting for a new
prime minister.
Yeah, so
coalition.
Yeah, chancellor, right? So how that plays into it, we don't know. But I bet Germany will be a much tougher market than Norway for many of these brands. But they will be in Germany because you haven't been to Europe if you're not in Germany, right? So that'll happen. We'll see that next year. But it'll be a lot.
And on the flip side, and that's the key, right? On the flip side, why Norway is the first market is because they've waived tariffs on vehicle sales or imports. They're basically paying Norwegians because they I think they waive taxes on the vehicles, and so behooves these Norwegians to buy these EVs because petrol prices are extremely high as well. And so it actually, I think, is some people in Norway are thinking the subsidies and the programs and the policies are too popular because it's actually putting more cars on the road when they actually want to reduce the number of cars on the road. So that is not a car company challenge. That's a country transportation system. What's our strategy challenge? And so the other reason that Norway is so friendly with Chinese EV companies and US EV companies is they don't build themselves. And so they need that. They need these cars imported. Whereas Germany, it's a major pillar for their economy. And so if there's not some formal protection put up, I think there's a small tariff currently, but it's going to be once there's 10, 12 brands that are trying to vie for the lower end of the market where Volkswagen's at, we'll see what policies get thrown in place to maybe try to protect some of that. Now,
it looks like from the price point of view, it's actually okay, I guess. The 600,000, what Norwegian, what's the currency? Kroners or
kroner, yeah.
Right. And with a VAS, you save some money. So exactly the same model.
And it's actually cheaper in Norway pre-subsidy than it is in China by a couple $1,000 US dollars. So, man, we've kind of talked about three things for the whole hour. So
yeah, I think today is going to be a little bit longer than usual. So we move on. We move on to Geely.
Let's move on to Geely.
Yeah. So the biggest surprise or not surprise was Eric Lee's move into the smartphone business. And you
okay.
Go ahead.
A little bit of a head scratcher, but no, just a bit of a head scratcher, but it's cool.
The way I look at this is Eric many years ago when he was not that well known, or his empire is not yet huge as it is now. He made a famous comment that cars are nothing but four wheels and a sofa, right? And we've heard about tablets on wheels, smartphones on wheels, and whatever on wheels, right? We've heard of the cliches. So why not think of it as this way? If we can have a smartphone wheels, why can't we have a car without wheels? And that is what Li Shufu is pulling from what's the, all these things he's pulling out of his sleeve. It's only half, they're only half out, okay? This guy is with the flying cars, Volocopter, with the satellites, right? With the smartphones. By the way, do you remember that they signed a deal to do supersonic trains?
Yeah.
You remember that a few years ago? And they won a deal to provide Wi-Fi. I think it was with Tencent on these bullet trains? I don't know how that's been developing, but this makes me think back to YT Jia's the ecosystem that he tried to, paint 5-6 years ago. And this Eric Lee is doing exactly that, kind of like this ecosystem. And Geely has this company, right, eCarX, based in Wuhan.
Yeah.
And speaking of Wuhan, I think another big part of the reason why Wuhan is becoming a new hub for not only for Geely, right, for many companies. For Geely, right, Lotus Tech, the Lotus Tech headquarters, the Lotus manufacturing facility, Geely's eCarX, many of their manufacturing facilities are in the city. So I think this is a location where Eric is going to execute some of his dreams, okay? And smartphone is only maybe small part of it. Based on the eCarX experience, which provides the telematics, okay? 车机,
right.
What's the English for it?
Right? V2X?
No, not V2X, but the vehicle onboard systems. The eCarX, and remember eCarX is actually one of the...
Like the...
I think...
The OS?
Yeah, the founding members supporting the Huawei's Open Harmony project that was announced last year. So slowly and silently, Geely is becoming pretty virtually integrated, which allows kind of Eric Lee to, if you're willing to say that's going off track, but it's part of a entire new scheme of things that he's trying to do.
Yeah.
This mobility ecosystem, right? We're no longer talking about the auto industry. We're seeing this merging of telecommunications, right?
Yeah.
In the auto sector.
And I think it's... Go ahead.
And last of it, who knows? BYD helps make phones. Are we going to see some sort of cooperation? I don't know. I mean, I'm just throwing these things out there that these are becoming new. These are becoming possible. That a few years back, you would, if I tell you this, you would, shoot me, right? That Geely is going to make smartphones. And Xiaomi is going to make cars. Everybody's just doing the same thing.
I think that's the important thing, though, right? Because he's not doing anything different from the tech guys that are coming to the mobility sector. I won't call it auto sector. I'll call it mobility sector. And the numbers, Eric maybe he's crazy like a fox, because the numbers, there's an opportunity, right? Because of what happened to Huawei, second quarter mobile handset deliveries or shipments were down 17% in China, okay? So Huawei left a huge hole. And then globally, they're up 13%. So China's missing out on that growth, or at least, some Chinese companies are missing out on that growth. And so potentially he sees a huge revenue generating opportunity. My doubts, not doubts, but I pause about this because he's already got a number of brands that he needs to really nurture, and then new technologies, new partnerships that really, really have to be focused on in order for his current stable of businesses and brands to succeed, right? Because he hasn't had a track record of building all these different brands that are greatly successful, okay? I think there are two or three brands in his stable that drive most of the revenue and most of the profits, just like any 80-20 rule. And so I applaud the risk, and I applaud the innovativeness and kind of the way of looking out further into the future. But, it remains to be seen whether or not Geely can transform themselves into more of a consumer's product / mobility provider company / platform. So
yeah, and if you look at the shareholders behind this Xingji technology registered in Wuhan that will be doing this smartphone business, Eric Lee is 55%, and the CEO of eCarX is a legal representative, and he holds 30%. So, and eCarX is a subsidiary of Geely. So I guess technically you could say that Geely is not the one that's actually making the smartphones, but and also the eCarX. Remember, it's also working with ARM. I think they set up a joint venture,
which is
on the
ARM China?
ARM China, yes. They set up a joint venture on the digital cockpit chips, smart cockpit, on autonomous driving. And this is all based in Wuhan. And they have their own OS. So
really quickly, for those that haven't followed or don't know the ARM China story, it's a huge mess that it might be worth Googling if you're into chips. And what's going on with chip shortages and strategies about U.S. versus China on the chip stuff.
Yeah. So
and I should mention that one of the reasons that they're in Wuhan is because Wuhan is known. Its universities are known as being very technical software. A lot of software development talent comes out of Wuhan. A lot of those universities. So I think it bears mentioning. So
yeah, and just the specific Wuhan location being in the center of China.
One of the four furnaces.
Yeah.
Right.
So not surprised, but not surprised of the smartphone entry, but it'll still take some time for we're actually going to see a phone come out, but. This is the thing about China that's it's perplexing, but never say never.
Yeah, well, I'm still amazed, having lived here 11 years, and you and I, before this call, we were direct messaging each other about all these different things going on, and paring it down into what we're going to talk about on this Spaces, right?
Yeah,
so,
Polestar, I don't know if you want to, we talked about this as well privately.
Yeah.
Especially interestingly, they chose this Gorse Guggenheim, which also helped Luminar.
Yes.
Go spec end of last year.
Tell everybody that tangled web. I think you tweeted it. Chinese, Swedish-owned Chinese, whatever. What did you say?
Yeah, it's Chinese parent company, Swedish headquartered, American listed.
Oh man! So and I'm just completely confused about how Polestar and Volvo, when they're both making EVs, are really going to differentiate themselves? Is Polestar like
Well,
more performance oriented,
yeah, if we look at Geely's family of brands, I think Polestar is pretty much at the very top. Volvo is kind of the luxury, right? And then you have the Zeekr. Zeekr is the Chinese performance luxury. I think it's more tiered toward performance. Whereas, well, same for Polestar, but Polestar, I think to me, they're more design led. They're more sustainability. They talk, I mean, the CEO, right? They're the first automaker to publish this document, the entire life cycle emissions. And he's Thomas Ingenlath. He's the first one to admit, the EVs, when we talk about the entire cycle, is not clean. It's what we need to do as an industry, right? And if you look at the presentation deck, the roadshow slide deck, it's interesting that they have this funnel of all the different brands, and they say that they and Tesla are the only global pure EV brands with multiple manufacturing and sales throughout the world. Okay.
Right.
And they tout this light asset model, which means they have all these plans. They have 5 models, right? The Polestar 1, 2, and then the 3, 4, 5, which will be produced at, I think on their deck, 5 or 6 different production locations in China.
Sure.
Think about that, right? They have, I think there's 3 plants in Chengdu, one operated by Volvo, one operated by Polestar, and one operated by GD. There's a plant in Hangzhou, I think. There's another plant in Chongqing. Okay, you can download their deck. There's tons of information. And they tout this asset light model, and they list these, multiples of how their cost structure is much lower than their competitors. Right. And going back to the sales number that you raised, they're planning 290,000 globally by 2025. That's a steep ramp from 10,000 or 20,000 last year.
Yeah, for the entire year.
Yeah, for the entire year globally. So yeah, you see them. Sure, they have this, kind of the operating leverage, but their brand, I don't know. Their vehicle, their next vehicle, supposedly the Polestar 3, is going to be priced in the Porsche Cayenne price range. Okay.
And built in South Carolina.
Both in China and South Carolina.
Right.
And their Polestar 5 2025 or 2024 is based on the Precept concept, and that's going to be built in China. So product-wise, exciting. Okay, asset, they have a light asset model, and they focus on sustainability. Okay, and we've seen what's happened with Ford and GM, right? It's all about building sustainably, right? The Blue Oval City, right? The 100% renewable energy. I think these are becoming popular marketing points now. So.
Oh yeah. I went to the Rouge plant in Dearborn, and I took my kids, and it was amazing, right? The top of the roof was all grass, sustainable, blah blah blah. I should have paid more attention, but I didn't. But it was, that's going to be the norm, right? Where we have net zero carbon footprint, right? And so, that's the cost of doing business now. By the way, it's not a marketing thing; it's everybody's doing it, and so we need to do it.
Yeah. So this is, and so the next to follow is basically Volvo cars. There's been a lot of rumors over the years. It's probably going to be in the next to list.
Yeah.
And
I will have to say, because you didn't mention it yet, that I think there should be some scrutiny here, because it is still a Chinese car company, whether it's a Swedish brand. So I think on both sides there could be some scrutiny for the transaction from the SEC and from some of the ministries here. So I don't know if it's clean just yet. I think they're targeting Q1 of 2022. So there could be a lot of hurdles still need to be jumped over in order for that transaction to close. But hey, let's do this. We can keep on talking because there's a couple other topics that we haven't covered yet. But maybe we can also open up the room.
Have people ask questions, or if people want to weigh in on some of the comments we made.
And I have to say that friend of China EVs and More, China Driven Will, did mention that there was 255 P5s delivered in September by XPeng. So they're in customers' hands, and we should probably start seeing social media posts about them if they're not already online. So thank you, Will. That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China EVs and more.